Okay. Good evening, Chaver. We're going to start with Hashem a new Masechta tonight. Masechta's Makkos, very Geshmak Masechta, very short. With Hashem, we're going to finish the time to make Siyam Kindness B'chayris. We're going to start today that Beis Amar Aleph, and we're going to do one a little more than a block. And as Hashem, we'll keep the pace and finish on time. Zok De'eling Mishnah. Keitzad ha'edim nasim zaymin. How do edim become edim zaymin? And the Gemara explains, the Mishnah explains, if they're made on a kayin that his parents he's a product of a kayin and a divorced or chalutza woman. So we do not in turn make the edim zaymin ben grushas or ben chalutzas. In other words, chalalim. They get malchus. So they do not become chalalim, they get malchus. If they made on someone that he killed b'shaygei and he's chayav to go into galus, do not put these guys into galus into the Ari Miklat. They don't have to run to the Ari Miklat themselves. They get malchus. The Mishnah should have started off because we just described two cases where they do not become zayim. The idea of Eidin Zayim is the pasuk says, they should do to them what they wanted to do to their friend, to their brother. But over here, we're not doing that. We're just beating them up a little bit, but they're not getting the exact punishment that they themselves attempted to inflict on Yenim. So this is not. You start off talking and you end up saying a different case that's not negated to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says later on, a few blocks later, if someone says the Mishnah over there describes the process for Edim Zayim, and the Mishnah says as follows: Amru lahem, the Edim come and say, "Hey, atem Edim, how could you be made on this Edus? In other words, how could you say whatever you just said? They are Zaymun. So that is the process of Zaymun. The Mishnah says it over there. So why is the Mishnah saying the process over here? The Mishnah already addresses it. And also you're addressing two cases that they don't actually become Zaymun. The Mishnah says later that if you ask them, if the two Edim come and say, how could the first set of Edim say their Edis, they were in a different location than the Edis that they say took place on that day that they say it took place. So that's the structure of Edim Zayim, and we're already addressing it later. And this is what we just said in our Mishnah is not that. It's in cases that we're not that we don't do to the Edim what they wanted to do. To answer the Gemara, what it means to say like this: Tada Hasam Kai. The Mishnah is going. Our town is I think it's up Peitas. It's towards the end of Sanhedrin. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but the end of Sanhedrin is references Edim Zayman and says the Mishnah. It brings down Sanhedrin Peitas. Yeah. So he says Kol Zayman Magdim and Oisem Misa. All Edim Zayman are they get that misa that they try to inflict. Chutz mizayim ba'as kain ubayala. A ba'as kain and her bayal. They get sreifa. Stam arayis is either most of it is chenek. Some of them are more intense. Skila, I think a mother might be sreifa. There's some that are I think are a little bit more intense. Most of them are chenek. She'em magdim al misa el misa acheres. They get a different misa. The yesh edim zayim min acherem. Now our Mishnah is saying the yesh edim zayim min acherem she'en oisem behem din hazama kol ikar. They only get Malchus Arbam. Keitzad Meidin Anu is our Mishnah. Meidin Anu be'Ishplaini Shehu Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza. Ein Arim Yasis Du Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza. Tachtav Ella Loikas Arbam. So that's our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is coming off that we the Mishnah again Mishnah at the end of the Mishnah on Pei Testament Aleph says that there are some cases that deviate from this cloud of Kasha Zamam in a shift in Misa. In other words, they get the Misa, but not the Misa they intended to inflict. But over here, we're saying that they Bechlal don't get Bechlal don't get any sort of punishment of the way they were trying to act, and they get a whole new separate protocol. But how do we know that how do you know that they don't become Ben Grushim and Chalutzit Hachtav, Amar Rishon ben Levi, the Amar Kra, Vasisim Lakasha Zamam Loi, Veloy Lazaroi. So we're Medayik, it says in the passage Vasisim Lakasha Zamam Loi, they said they wanted to do, they say do to them what they wanted to do to their friend. So it's Vasisim Loi, we're Medayik Loi, Veloy Lazaroi. In fact, the more Velasula the day, Veloy Lazula the Zari. So maybe just give him the punishment that he tried to inflict. So if Ruvain and Shimon, who are Kahanim, tried to make another Kayin a Chalal, so now make Ruvain and Shimon Chalalim and leave his kids alone. Everything more that's not going to work. Why? Because we eat in Kasha Zaman. If we're going to follow this Kasha Zaman protocol, it needs to be 100%. Over here, there's no way to do Kasha Zaman unless you're going to transgress the diak of loy. So you have two inyanim. You have to do only to him. You cannot affect anyone else. Now, obviously, you're going to affect his kids. They're going to be a Simon, right? That's still affecting them. But they're not going to have the punishment that they try to inflict is not going to be done to them. They're not going to get the punishment. So you have to only do to him what he tried to do. And so that's one klal, and then you also have to do, it has to be exactly what he wanted to do. So you have these two, in this case, it's two conflicting ideas. Because if I'm going to do what I wanted to do, is I'm going to make his kids chalalim. Because that's what he tried to do. He tried to make this other kind of chalal, and mamela all his kids are chalalim. And if you don't do that, so if you do that, you have a problem of we don't want to affect his kids, and we don't want to punish his kids. And if you don't do that, then you have a chasar and kasha zaman. So once we're deviating from kasha zaman, we have to go completely into a different protocol of Makkos, which we're going to learn how we get there from. That's going to be a different diak from a lima from a different pasuk. But again, obviously, the obvious question is Makkos is also not kasha zaman. The way I understand it is that it's a different protocol. Once you're not in Zayman protocol, that's Makkos. It's a separate Makkos protocol. If you're in Zayman protocol, that has to be 100% Zayman, and if it affects the kids, then you can't act on the Zayman. Talking about weiter. Barpada Amar Kavachaimer. He wants to answer the reason why you don't make the Kayin Achala is the Kavachaimer. Umah Mischala Ein Mischala. I'm sorry. Umah Hamachala Ein Mischala. Ma the Kayin Stam is nothing to do with Zayman anymore. His Kavachaimer is going to be from a regular Kayin that's boil grusha, let's say. Let's say Alamana. So a kain gadol that's boil and Amana, he's mechalal her. It's aser for him, and she now even though she's only an Amana, she cannot marry a kain hedyet. Even though she would be, in other words, before the bia with the kain gadol, she would be allowed to. She became mischalal from the bia with the kain gadol, which was aser to her. These people, they didn't even do anything. Of course, they shouldn't get punished. Again, the Kavachayim is ma'adach a kain gadol. That's mechalo almana. He doesn't become mechalo, but she does. So these Edom Zayim that try to make her make this guy a chalal, of course they shouldn't become chalalim. But the Gemara, Maskul Ravina, im came batu taris Edom Zayim. You with this Kavachayim, you could wipe out the entire Edom Zayim. Why? Because we have a rule that if Bezin actually goes through with the punishment, then they are pater. So if they walk into Bezin and say, Reuven killed Shimon, they go through the whole rigmarole, back and forth, all the questions, and Bezin finds Reuven guilty, and they kill him. Sreifa, they hang his body until Shkia, and that's it. And then two Edom come and say, the Edom that made you that made you kill Reuven were with us in Miami, and the whole thing never happened. They don't get punished anymore because it's kasha zamam lasa, but like kasha asa. So with that klal, you could upslug the entire concept of Edom Zayman. Umah cycle any niskal habala sakal v'loy sakal any din shalay sakal madach of Edom Zayman that came and killed him. They don't get killed. Of course, Edom that they wanted to kill. Of course, they don't get killed. That's using the same logical structure, the same logical train as what we just tried to say with the Amana and the Kain Gadol, right? Right? Somebody who comes to somebody who makes her a chal doesn't become a chal himself. So the same thing over here. Someone who they actually kill him, they don't get killed. Of course, if they wanted to kill him, of course they don't get killed. So anyway, so you could machavek the entire sugya of Edom Zayman is bottled with this svara. The real pshat is the original pshat, which we said, kasha zamam loy v'loy lazari. You only affect him again. You only punish him, not his children. Of course, his kids are going to get affected, and his wife is affected, and the shul. But the punishment is only for him. So there's more me'id and anu be'ish pliny. Now the second case of the Mishnah, shehu chayiv galus. How do we know he doesn't go into galus himself? The Edom don't go into galus themselves. Amar Rish Lakish Damar Kra hu Yanis al achas ha'arem hu v'lay zaymin. It says the pasuk says that when it's talking about the guy who kills b'shoigeg, it says that he has to run in, and when medayek that dafka him he has to run in, and not the Edom Zayim that tried to make him run in. In a goyla, madach a guy that kills b'mezid doesn't go into galus because he's chayav misa. But even if there's no Edom, or even if there's an Eid Echad, or even if he gets out on technicality, so there's two Edom, but there's no Asra, or the Edom or Pasul, whatever it is. But you have Edom that he killed someone, but there's no Asra. Let's say that's a perfect example because that's the din. He gets, so we know that he killed him. The psak is that he killed, but there's no assault. We can't do anything about him. But there's no so just take him down one tier down and let him run to Galus. He gets nothing. So again, Umahu sha'asamais meiz ein goyla hein shaloyas meiz ein adin shaloyigala. Now, even though they were amazed, they didn't do a maisa. They did diba ba'alma. They were just stamp poppling. They just had edus. Now we're going to see that edus is not considered a maisa, even though his gums are flapping. But out in this sugya, in other words, out kal v'chaimer, it's a lower level. So you should not make them go into galus. This is a kal v'chaimer that Rabbi Yochanan wants to make. The Gemara said is the Gemara upshlogs it from in and of itself. Who sha'asa maisa b'mezid loy liglei? Why? Ki hechi the loy tihavilei kapara. The reason why that the guy who kills b'mezid doesn't go into galus is not a kula by it. The idea of a kal v'chaimer is that I find a kal by a chaimer. Of course, the kal applies to a kal. That's the idea of a kal v'chaimer. But if I could show you that the kal is a chaimer, then I would not apply this kal to the kal. The kal, in this case, is a chaimer because I don't let him go to galus, and he should not get a kapara. He's a really bad man, and he killed someone b'mezid. He does not get to go in galus and get off scot-free. These people did not do a maisa b'mezid. Again, they were b'mezid, but they did not do a maisa. The same idea. We try to come up with another kavachim with how we should finagle the svara or the din of the Mishnah, and the machmat is the Rishayna. There's a dia from the pasuk, the hu Yanis, and other people, and the Edom Zayim don't run away, don't run to galus. Omar Ula, Remez Edom Zayim min Torah minayin. And Ula wants to know, where do I have a Remez Edom Zayim? In fact, Remez Edom Zayim min v'aksiv, v'asizim l'kashazamam. What are you asking? What's the Remez to Edom Zayim? Edom Zayim is b'fer shapaskin in Torah. Ella, what Ula meant to ask is Remez Edom Zayim min shaloike min Torah minayin. Where do I see this idea? The pasuk says v'asizim l'kashazamam. I don't see anywhere in that pasuk than in Makkos. So Ula wants to know, how did you get here? Where do we know this idea of Makkos by Edom Zayim min Torah? So we have another Joshua as follows. So it's Diko as tzaddik in Bezdin when you find someone righteous, and you find someone who's not righteous. Again, this is talking about Dinei Mamanis or Dinei Bedim Lachavere. Because there's a nice of a night, and there's two people. There's a plaintiff and a defendant, and we're going to be mezaka, the one who's zakai, and we're going to I don't know what the other side of that is, but the other guy who's wrong is going to get a din against him. And the Rasha is going to get Makkos. Why are you saying? Why is not every case of Dinei Mamanis? You have like landlord-tenant dispute. So the guy who's wrong gets Makkos. Oh, he has to pay a fine. He has to pay his rent, whatever the cheshbon is. But there's no Makkos involved. So why is this rishus tied to Makkos? Ella, we're going to darshan this a little bit out of the box. Edom sharashiu es tzaddik. Edom came and they took a tzaddik, somebody who was innocent, and they made him into a rasha. also Edom Achrini, Ve'etzdiko es tzaddik. So they were matzdik to tzaddik l'mafreya. They said, no, this guy did not do anything wrong, and they challenged the Edom Zayim, the false Edom in a specific way. The Mikara, Ve'etzdiko es tzaddik, the Mikara. Shavinu lahani risham, and they show that these people are risham. And then there's a case of that they get Makkos. So that's the case that they get Makkos. Now they don't always get Makkos, and we're going to see in a second why. But there's a reference to a case where they get Makkos, and instead of Kashazama. It says in the Dibros, so why is that not a good enough way? Why is that not pasuk suffice to get Malchus? And the Gemara's kasha is either the Gemara's kasha is, I'm not sure. The Gemara's kasha is that every single one. Oh, Rashi says over here that all Einshim should get Malchus by default. So therefore, over here, unless it's mafarish, unless the pasuk is mafarid to another einish. And over here, I cannot do the einish that was mafarid because we have the issues of kashazamam or another diak. So everything more mishum to have lav shein b'maisa v'chalav shein b'maisa ain't like in a lav. This lav, like we just said before, is a lav of dibar, and they do, and it's considered lav shein b'maisa, and we would not get malchus and lav shein b'maisa. We learned in the brisa. There's 4 halachas that we learned by Eidim Zayim. Ein nasim by Gerusha ben Chalutz, like we said in the Mishnah. Ein galim la'ari mikla, we said in the Mishnah. Ein mishalman es ha-kaifer. They don't pay kaifer. Kaifer is when a shar hamuid kills another person. Then the baalim have to pay. They have to pay kaifer, which is the value. It's much like how they pay. We'll get to that in a minute. The einim karim be'eved ivri, and they do not get sold as an eved ivri. Every would be sold obviously in a case where he stole and he cannot pay back the amount that he stole. So Bezin will sell him to take care of his genevas. There's other ways to get everybody as well, but that's the case that we're talking about that would have to do with Bezin. Rabbi Kiva Amar Af Ein Mishalman Al Pi Atzmai also does not pay on his own admission, because he holds it to knas. Then we're going to go through that in a second. Ein nasim by Gerusha ben Chalutz k'da amr. We already said this. Ein gail l'navi mikla k'da amr. The ein misham as the kaifer kisavri. It must be that they hold kufra kapara. That kaifer is for a kapara, and it's not a din of mamanis. It's a din in being paid to the owner of the shar's his own life, his own chiv misa in a way. V'hani lav b'nei kapara ninu, and they are not b'nei kapara, because they didn't do anything wrong, essentially. Now, just to understand this, the whole idea of Edom Zayim is that they're supposed to do what they're supposed to, they're going to do what they try to do, so they don't have to be a bar kapara. The idea over here is that the whole kapara, the guy's payment is to take away this chi of misa b'dei shemayim that he has on him. That he doesn't actually have a chi of misa b'dei shemayim. They can't attach that to him, so they didn't actually do anything. That's how, at least that's one gang and how to understand it, that they didn't actually cause the money that he's paying is to get off a chiyuv misa that he doesn't actually have. So it doesn't really fit the bill. The Tanya, the Nasam, the main nizik, that whose nafsha does he have to, the value of whose life does he have to give? The nizik, the one who was killed. Rabbi Shmuel ben Naishar, Yochanan ben Braka Amar, the main mazik. Hold on. Rabbi Shmuel ben Naishar, Yochanan ben Braka Amar, the main mazik. My lab, oh, so Gemara wants to say that the machlekes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Shmuel ben Naishar ben Braka is whether kaifer is to redeem my own life, the owner of the shar's life, or to compensate the nizik's party, the nizik's family. The man the Tanakh says that you pay based off the nizik is because it's mammon. It has to do with how much damage was done. And the mandam that says that it's kufr mamayna is from the mazik that he's actually. I'm sorry, that kufr kapara is that he's from the mazik and he's redeeming his life, and it's an Indian of kapara. Obviously, he pays it to the nizik, but the idea is that he's being paid himself in a way. Amar Papa La Dafka. Right, the Kuli Alma Kufra Kapara. It could be that everyone holds that it's Kufra Kapara. They just hold that you get your kapara a different way. That the Tanakama holds you get your kapara by paying the value of the nizik, and Rabbi Shmuel ben Breika Rabbi Shmuel ben Noish Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika says that you get your kapara by paying your own value. Why? What's the Tanakama's side? Nema hashas lamata, nema hashas lamala. They switch it around. Nema hashas lamala, nema hashas lamata. The hashas lamala refers to if somebody hits a pregnant woman and she causes her to miscarry. So then the husband hits him up and is teveya damages. That's hashasa, is being teveya. So of course over there it's talking about the value of the nizik. We're talking about they evaluate the woman, how much she was worth before, how much she was worth after, and that's when she has to pay the midvadas. So mala alam but the nizik avkam but the nizik. Rabbi Shmuel the nasam pidyon nafshik, you have to give the pidyon of his nefesh. In other words, the one whose nefesh you're giving, he has to give his pidyon nefesh of his own nefesh. But Rabbanan in pidyon nafshay, it's still a pidyon nefesh for him. But because of this hashasa, I have I evaluated by the value of the nizik. If the next case in the Bryce says that they don't get sold as evident, they have where to pay. So if let's say they say if the Edom say that Reuven stole $100,000 and Reuven does not have $100,000, but the Edom do have $100,000. So if they have, in that case, then they're not sold because they could say the migu the ihu loim is davin and inunami loim is davin. No, if we wouldn't have been sold for this because we would be able to cover the check. So no, I'm sorry, the other way around. The Reuven has the almost Ganav has. If they say that the Ganav has $100,000 and he was willing to write them a check for $100,000, he said, "Okay, you know what? Bezin was about to pass, and he said, okay, fine, I have the funds, I'll put an escrow, whatever." And they could say, "Look, I wasn't causing him to get sold because he was not about to be sold." In Unami, like Mizdavni, Alahech the less later the day, Afagav the Islay the Didu, Mizdavni. But in a case where the plaintiff, the subject, the nidain, is Ataka broke, and he would have been sold, then even if they have, then they would be sold, which I don't understand fully because then they could just be part of themselves right away. So I don't help with the big spritzes that we have to bring sold in that. But regardless, it's a small piece in the Havamina. If we were in your position, we wouldn't have to be sold. So you shouldn't sell us now. Ella Savar of when do we say that there's no that they don't that an Everett that they do not get that Edom Zayman do not get sold into slavery because of a geneva that they try to pin on someone? If one of the parties, whether the Nidain or the Edom Zayman, have the wherewithal to pay the alleged geneva, then they do not get sold because of one of these two arguments. If the need doesn't have any money and they don't have any money, they don't have any of these arguments, don't take into effect. They get sold. Rava argues on this, but he says, only his geneva could cause him to be sold, and his Edom Zayman, his false edus cannot force him into being sold. So Rava argues and says that it's not totally in this whether they have this argument. It's a pasuk in the Torah, and there's nothing to talk about. So that he says that if they're moida on their own, they don't get punished. B'chlal. In fact, my time in the Kiva, the Salva concept of a knas enu shaman biatzma. Amar Abateda, you should know Sherry like asu ma'isa. How did you? Rav is explaining why it's a knas. They didn't do anything, and they got killed. Where do you have that? It's not an appropriate punishment. It's a knas, obviously. The money's in the owner's hands, and they still have to pay. In other words, they didn't cause any damage, and they have to pay. So obviously, it's a din in knas. It's not a din in mammon. What's your point? That he didn't do anything. So this is what Rabbi just said. Everything went in Chanami Ema, the Chain Amar Reb Nachman is parroting Rabbi. He's not saying like his own idea. He's just saying it in a different way. Rabbi's focusing on the Nerogim, and Reb Nachman brings it into a monistic way. Fine. Talk to more right. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, Eid Zaymim Mishal Lefi Chalkai. One Eid Zaymim, each Eid pays according to his cheshbon. If they say that if they try to cause 100,000 damages, they each pay 50. Tanidim, we already learned this. The Mishnah says later that you divide the payments like we just said. So if two Eidim try to take $100 out of Ruvain, they each have to pay $50. So he's whole. Well, he's whole anyway because the money didn't transfer. But he gets compensated for the amount of attempted damages, we'll call it. But by Makkos, if they say, oh, Ruvain, what's a good Makkos? Ruvain ate chelav. Classic Makkos example. No, it's not. That's kares. I'm sorry. What's a good Makkos? Ruvain. I should think of one good there. No, if Ruvain, no, we have to think of one geshmak alav. What's one geshmak alav? I'm managed blinking on all of them now. Hey, he did this. He plowed his cows together, right? He did climb. He did climb on his cows. He's wearing climb on his pants, and I gave him a straw, and he didn't take it off, and he continued walking. So they wanted to have Ruvain shot Makkos. So you're not mishal. You don't say, okay, so you get let's say they shot him up for 49 doesn't divide it to anyway. 39 doesn't divide it to anyway. Let's say you get 30 Makkos. So they each got 15 and Shalom Yisrael. No, they each get the full 30. So that can't be because we're not. The Mishnah already said that. So what do you Rav? What is Rav? What is Yehuda Amar Rav coming to say that every aid pays aid zayin mishalim fi chalka his chelik? What does that mean? The mishalim palga, that if one of them is zaymim, so if Reuven and Shimon come to be made about someone else, and then two aidim come and say, I don't know about Shimon's aidis, but Reuven is with us in Miami. In that case, Reuven only wrote Reuven's aid, so let him pay only half, because he said he could say I only try to do half the damage. And the Gemara, for the Gemara, he doesn't pay at all. The whole Eid and Zayim, the whole parsha does not come into effect until both Eidim were found to be Eid and Zayim. If he says he retracts his edus. He says, no, I said false edus. For the Gemara, for the Kol Kamina, does it take any effect? Once you say your edus, you cannot retract your edus. So this is talking about another case. So what Rabbi Yehuda is talking about is that they get convicted to be Eidim Zayim in Bezdin Aleph. That he goes to Bezdin Beis and confesses his Eidim Zayim, his part in the Zayim, the fact that he got convicted. So in that case, Bezdin, even though he's not with his partner, Bezdin will make him pay half of what the attempted damages were. And the Gemara of the Gemara right to command like Rabbi Akiva. Obviously, this is not Rabbi Akiva. Why? Because we said before that Rabbi Akiva says the Rabbi Akiva He doesn't pay on his own admission at all. If you want to make this work according to Rabbi Akiva, you have to say and there was already a psak din. Once there's already a gemar din in Bezdin, then it's mammon. So I would think that if he comes to Bezdin and admits, again, not according to Rabbi Akiva, he doesn't have to admit that there was a Gemara din. But even according to Rabbi Akiva, if he admits there's a Gemara din, this halacha of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav would take place, and he would have to pay his chelik of the attempted damages. Yashakayach, and Hashem, tomorrow night we will continue. Oh my.